The neighbor who never slept. Before we start, smash that like button, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because tonight's story might make you check your locks twice before bed. I used to think the worst thing a person could be was rude. That was before I learned what people can hide behind quiet smiles and polite nods. Before I learned what it feels like to live next door to someone who watched every detail of your life like a hobby. It started the first week I moved into the building on Lakehurst Avenue. Nothing fancy, cheap 1980s brick for floors, no elevator, a laundry room that smelled like wet carpet. But it was mine. My first place without roommates, without shared noise, without the endless shuffle of someone else's kitchen timer beeping at 2 a.m. Unit 2C was small, but it had sunlight in the mornings and a window that overlooked the street. Across the hall was 2D, and the tenant there was the first person I met in the building. He held the door open for me while I wrestled a lamp up the stairs. Tall, mid-30s maybe, clean-shaved, neat clothes, the kind of man who blended in anywhere. New here? He asked. Just moved in, I said, slightly out of breath. He smiled. It was small and quiet, restrained in a way I didn't think much about until later. I'm Louis, he said. Apartment 2D. I told him my name, thanked him for holding the door, and thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The first strange thing was the footsteps. Every night, long after the building went silent, I would hear pacing in the hallway. Slow, even, deliberate. Like someone moving with no destination, just walking. At first I thought it was a tenant coming home late. But the footsteps went on for hours, back and forth, never stopping. And the strange part? They always stopped exactly at my door. The second strange thing was the notes. Not threatening. Not even creepy on the surface. But unsettling in how specific they were. On Thursday morning, I found a sticky note on my door. You left your stove on for a few minutes before turning it off. Be careful. On Saturday. You got home later than usual last night. Roads must have been bad. On Monday. You don't have to slam your door so hard. It echoes. I never slammed my door. I never mentioned the stove to anyone. I never told anyone what time I got home. I tried to brush it off as overthinking, but the unease grew like a knot behind my ribs. By week 3, I started noticing something worse. Louis always seemed to be there. Every time I left my apartment, I heard his lock click a second later. Every time I came home, I could feel eyes through the peephole. Every time I opened my mail, he happened to walk by. Coincidence? I told myself. But coincidence doesn't pay attention to what time you shower every night. One evening, I left my apartment around 9 p.m. to buy detergent from the drugstore around the corner. As I reached the stairwell, I heard a door open behind me. Louis stepped out. You're going out late, he said casually. Just laundry, I replied. That's good. Laundry is important. You do yours at the same time most nights. There was nothing threatening in his tone. Nothing obviously wrong. But the way he said it, like he'd been studying me. I forced a smile and hurried down the stairs. When I got back 20 minutes later, something felt off the moment I reached the landing. My door, which I had locked, had a tiny shift in the angle of the doormat, just enough to notice, but too small to be accidental. And taped to my door was another note. Your detergent brand changed today. Interesting. My hand shook as I unlocked the door and went inside. That night I barely slept. Every creak in the building made me flinch. Every hum of the refrigerator sounded like footsteps. At 3:12 a.m. I heard the softest sound, like someone gently testing the doorknob. Not turning it. Just touching it. Like a hand resting on metal. I held my breath. I waited. Slowly, the shadow under the door shifted, the faint outline of shoes positioned directly outside my apartment. He stood there for, I don't know how long. Long enough for my heartbeat to get loud in my ears. The next morning, I called the building manager. He sighed. Louis? Nice guy. Bit of an insomniac. Probably nothing. But that afternoon, when I came home early from work, I caught sight of something I can never unsee. Louis, standing in front of my door, bent slightly forward, listening. Not knocking. Not waiting. Listening. And when he realized I was behind him, he straightened slowly, smiling that same small polite smile. "You're home early," he said. Like he already knew my schedule. Like he always knew. That was the moment I realized I might not be living across from a neighbor. I might be living across from someone studying me. Someone who didn't sleep. Someone who had memorized the rhythm of my life. Someone who smiled like nothing was wrong. Until it was. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. People have eccentric neighbors all the time. People misinterpret things, exaggerate patterns, imagine connections that aren't really there. That's what I repeated to myself every morning as I made coffee and every night as I double-checked the deadbolt. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor, and sometimes, the things you try hardest to ignore find a way to force your attention. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of quiet midweek night where the building felt hollow, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. I got home just after 8 p.m., tired, carrying takeout from the Thai place down the street. The hallway lights flickered as I walked toward my apartment, buzzing faintly. A normal thing for old buildings. But as I approached my door, I noticed something new. A small folded paper slipped under my doormat. Not a sticky note this time. This was deliberate. Careful. I picked it up with a sinking feeling. Inside it, written in the same neat block handwriting, were 5 words. "You forgot your window last night." That was impossible. My window had been closed. I remembered because it had rained. But someone wanted me to believe otherwise. Or, worse, someone wanted me to question my memory. My hands were shaking as I pushed into my apartment. The air felt wrong. Heavier. Still. I checked the window. Closed. Locked. Exactly how I left it. I paced the living room trying to calm down, but as night settled, another layer of dread sank in. Louis's door hadn't opened for hours. No pacing. No footsteps. No late-night activity. Just silence. A silence so deep it pressed against my ribs. Around 11:30 p.m., I was sitting on my couch, trying to distract myself with an old sitcom, when the power went out. Everything snapped into blackness. No hum from the refrigerator. No hallway lights through the peephole. No street lamp glow seeping through the curtains. Just absolute, suffocating dark. My pulse quickened. I waited for the emergency lights to kick on. They didn't. Then footsteps. Slow. Soft. Heavy. In the hallway. And they stopped right outside my door. I froze on the couch, too afraid to breathe. My eyes strained to adjust to the pitch-black shadows, but it was useless. Darkness swallowed everything. A gentle scrape sounded against the door. Metal. Against metal. The unmistakable drag of a key, or something trying to imitate one. Not entering, just testing. Feeling. Mapping. My breath caught in my throat. I reached blindly for my phone and unlocked it, the screen casting a dim glow across my knees. I typed 911, but hesitated before pressing call. Was I overreacting? What would I even say? My neighbor might be standing outside my door in the dark because the power went out. Then a soft tap hit the door, so light it was almost polite. I dialed. But before I could hit call, the footsteps moved away, slow and steady, receding down the hallway until there was nothing left but silence and the sound of my own heart pounding. I sat there in the darkness for nearly an hour, gripping the phone, unable to move. When the lights flickered back on around 12:40 a.m., everything looked normal. Too normal. I went to the peephole and stared out. Nothing. No shadows. No movement. But something else caught my eye. On the floor in front of Louis's door was a small object, barely visible in the dim hallway lighting. A single black shoelace. Neatly coiled. Placed there with intention. And a fresh note under my doormat. "Did you feel safe?" That was when I realized something terrifying. Lewis wasn't improvising. He wasn't curious. He wasn't bored or lonely. He was escalating. And I was no longer just observing him. I had become part of whatever game he was playing. After the shoelace and that note, I stopped pretending things would calm down. I stopped telling myself I was being dramatic. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. I left my lights on. I pushed a chair under the doorknob at night. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the waiting. The certainty that Lewis wasn't finished. The moment everything changed was a Friday evening, quiet, cold, the hallway unusually empty. I was coming home early from work, hoping daylight would make everything feel less threatening. My fingers were tight around my keys as I climbed the stairs. But halfway up the second floor, I stopped. Lewis's door was wide open. Not cracked. Not ajar. Fully open, like an invitation. I froze at the top of the landing. His apartment had always been sealed shut, quiet, private. Seeing it exposed felt wrong, like stumbling onto something sacred and dangerous. The lights inside were off. The air that drifted out felt colder than the hallway. A police officer's words from some true crime interview echoed in my mind. Predators love entrances. They love thresholds. I stepped backwards slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the doorway. And that's when I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. A single, quiet inhale. From inside the darkened apartment. Not frantic. Not surprised. Just waiting. I bolted. Ran down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the street without looking back. My hands shook as I called 911 from the sidewalk. My voice was a mess of panic and half-sentences, but they sent officers immediately. 2 patrol cars arrived in under 5 minutes. I watched them climb the stairs from the building's front steps, my knees trembling. I expected shouting, commands, radios crackling. But instead, they walked back down calmly. "Ma'am," one officer said, "the unit is empty." "Empty?" I whispered. He was in there. I heard. "No furniture. No clothes. No personal items," the officer said. "It looks like no one's lived there in months." My throat dried. That didn't make sense. I had watched Lewis walk in and out of that apartment almost daily. I had heard him pacing. Smelled cleaning chemicals. Seen him dragging bags. Watched him listening at my door. "How is that possible?" I asked. The officer hesitated. Then he turned on his body cam footage from inside 2D. The apartment was bare. Truly bare. Peeling paint. Dusty floors. Empty closets. Old radiator. No sign of life. And on the floor, dead center, was a single piece of paper. The officer zoomed in. It was a note. Short. Clean handwriting. Just one sentence. "Thank you for participating." My skin went cold. "No one lives here, ma'am," the officer repeated gently. "Whoever you think was watching you, he wasn't on the lease. We're checking the building's cameras now." I felt the world tilt beneath me. Because if Lewis didn't live there, if the apartment had been empty the entire time, then who had I been seeing? Who had been pacing at night? Who had left the notes? And where had he been watching from? The officers took my statement. They recommended I stay with someone for a while. I didn't argue. I was gone within an hour, leaving the building and everything I owned behind. I never went back. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear those soft footsteps in my dreams. That slow, deliberate pacing. That careful inhale. And I wonder if somewhere out there, he's listening again.